Hello everyone, Interact back here again with another episode of Entity Education Extra Credit. In this episode, we're going to be covering the rework of Herman Carter, probably better known as the Doctor. As always, there will be timestamps up on the screen right now, and also down in the description of the video if you want to skip around to certain sections. The Doctor's base stats are now exactly the same as any normal killer, meaning that there's no more stance dancing required to shock people and no more changes in your speed. This means that you will have the normal movement speed of 4.6 meters per second, or 115%, and have a tear radius of 32 meters by default. So let's talk about the Doctor's power, Carter's Spark. They thankfully simplified his power a lot in this rework, so there's a little bit less to explain this time around. I think the best place to start is by talking about Madness and what exactly it does for survivors. For a survivor to enter Madness Tier 1, they will need to have gained 5 Madness. For Tier 2, they'll need 55 Madness, and for Tier 3, they'll need 105 Madness. Every time a survivor goes up a tier of Madness, they will scream and reveal their location via a bubble notification with a basic survivor model, so you won't be able to tell exactly who it is unless you check their status in the bottom left. So what exactly do these different tiers of Madness do, you may wonder? Well, Madness Tier 1 is simple. Survivors will have a 33% chance of having their skill checks appear in a random position on their screen. Once a survivor reaches Tier 1 of Madness, they will be unable to leave it. That's all. For Madness Tier 2, the chance for randomly placed skill checks will be increased to 66%, and they will start to spawn illusionary doctors that will spawn 6 meters in front of them, looking at them wherever the illusion was spawned. Keep in mind, this means that sometimes the Doctor illusions will spawn in very odd locations, such as on top of very tall loops, boxes, or whatever junk might be nearby, leading to some very interesting spots for these Doctor illusions to be spawned. These illusions will be spawned every 16 to 32 seconds, and the Doctor will be able to see the illusion's auras for 1 second while they remain active. Madness Tier 2 is where a lot of the Doctor's add-ons, which we will cover briefly in the add-on section, begin to function as well. And finally, we get to Madness Tier 3. Once a survivor hits Madness Tier 3, they go fully insane. This means that they will be unable to work on generators, heal, sabotage, or use items. They will still be able to unhook survivors, open exit gates, use the hatch, and vault things, so be aware of that. Their skill checks will have a 100% chance to be randomly placed on their screen, and the illusionary doctors will begin to spawn more frequently, while in Tier 3, between every 8 and 16 seconds. The Doctor will still only be able to see these illusionary auras for 1 second. Survivors in Madness Tier 3 will also scream out occasionally, between every 16 and 32 seconds, revealing their location to the Doctor via a bubble notification, the same as the ones that are spawned when survivors go up a tier of Madness. The main action that survivors will be given while in Tier 3 is called Snap Out of It, and it will take 12 seconds to do in total, and they can use it to reset their madness. In the update, this was made so that if they are interrupted while progressing the bar, they will keep the progress, unlike how it used to work. So survivors can now kind of buffer their snaps and will only lose 25% of their progress if they fail one of the skill checks that they are given, instead of being fully reset like they used to be. According to the patch notes, survivors are supposed to be given 4 skill checks during a snap out of it action, but I have seen it only give about 3 skill checks, so I'm just not sure if it's bugged or what. It can sometimes be a little hard to tell with behavior. Another thing to note that has changed is that snapping will now take survivors back down to Tier 1 of Madness, instead of previous patches where it would only take them down to Tier 2. Survivors will passively decay half of a Madness, 0.5 Madness, per second while not in the Doctor's terror radius, and this will be paused while inside the Doctor's terror radius. This decay is not able to drop survivors down tiers of Madness. The only way to drop down is from snapping from Tier 3 to Tier 1. This is significantly more reasonable than how Madness Decay used to function, so I'm happy they simplified it. The Doctor has 2 abilities on top of being able to just hit people with his large stick thing. By holding down mouse 2 on PC, of course, you can charge up and then release a shock therapy attack after a 1-second channel. There is a delay of 1 second after you release the shock therapy attack and when it will actually affect the survivors, so it can be a little difficult to land sometimes. Shock therapy will interrupt actions that survivors are currently performing and block them from vaulting or dropping pallets for 2.5 seconds, and give the doctor a 1.5 second cooldown after using it, where he will be unable to attack or use another shock therapy. However, he will be able to perform other actions such as kicking generators or pallets or vaulting, so it's not exactly the same as, say, Billy's cooldown. Shock therapy has a default range of 10.7 meters. Shock therapy will give survivors 30 madness per hit, so it will take 2 shock therapy attacks to go up a tier of madness for a survivor. The doctor will be slowed by up to 67% of his current movement speed during the shock therapy attack charge, so down to 3.08 meters per second or 77% speed. This is not, however, a linear drop in speed, it is cubic, so it will gradually get worse during the charge up, eventually hitting that 77% speed at the apex of the slowdown. The doctor's other ability and his new one is Static Blast. Static Blast is performed by holding down left control on PC, of course, for 2 seconds. During this time, the doctor will be slowed by up to an insanely slow 25.310796% of his current movement speed. I'm not joking, it is actually hard-coded to be 25.310796%. Why? Who knows anymore, man? I don't. Anyways, being slowed by that amount that I'm not going to say anymore will bring you down to 1.164296616 meters per second, or 29.1074154% speed. Do they really need to have that many decimal places? Nope. Do they have them? Yup. As with shock therapy, this is not a linear slowdown, but a cubic slowdown, so you will only be slowed by that amount at the apex of the slowdown, not during the entire channel time of 2 seconds. Anyways, Static Blast has a cooldown of 60 seconds, and will inflict 50 madness by default to all survivors within your terror radius. Did I forget to mention that it was tied to your terror radius while I was losing my sanity saying every single decimal point in that speed change? My mistake. Because Static Blast causes 50 madness, it is a guaranteed tier up for every survivor that it hits, which will cause them to scream and reveal their location to you every time you use it, and it hits at least one survivor. So let's talk about the Doctor's add-ons now. More or less, a lot of them are just the same, but some of them have changed pretty drastically. One of the biggest changes is that in addition to getting nerfed into the ground, the electrode add-ons will no longer increase the width of your shock therapy, they will only increase the length. What's even worse than that, however, is the removal of the actual percentages that used to be on the electrode add-ons. Behavior is actually regressing in terms of transparency for add-ons, which sucks, but I guess it's nice for me because I get to make these videos for the foreseeable future. We start off at the common tier with Moldy Electrode. Moldy Electrode will slightly increase the range and charge time of your shock therapy. This means that it will increase the range of your shock therapy by 15%, bringing it up to 12.3 meters, and will increase the charge time by 5%, bringing it up to 1.05 seconds. Next up is Maple Night. Maple Night will reveal the area of effect of your shock therapy attack. This one basically just does what it says, but be warned it can be kind of annoying having it on your screen all the time. Following that, we have Order Class 1. This add-on will slightly increase the madness inflicted by your Static Blast. This means an increase to your madness inflicted by Static Blast of 10%, bringing it up to 55 madness per Static Blast. It will also give survivors in madness tiers 2 and 3 the Order Affliction, making them see illusionary pallets until they touch them. These pallets will be spawned within a range of 32 meters from the Doctor at broken pallet spots, and will happen every 20 seconds. The Doctor will be able to see the auras of these illusionary pallets. And the final common add-on is Calm Class 1. This add-on will slightly increase your terror radius while Static Blast is off cooldown, and slightly decrease your terror radius while it is on cooldown. This means an increase or decrease to your terror radius of 10%, bringing it to 35.2 meters or 28.8 meters without any terror radius changes. It will also give survivors in Madness's tiers 2 and 3 a considerable chance to have the terror radius play as if they were on the edge of it for 15 seconds. This means that it will happen with a frequency of between every 15 and 45 seconds. Moving on to the uncommon add-ons, we start off with Polished Electrode. Polished Electrode will moderately increase the range and charge time of your shock therapy. This means that it will increase the range by 25%, bringing it up to 13.4 meters, and will increase the charge time by 10%, bringing it up to 1.1 seconds. The next Doctor add-on is Restraint Class 2. This add-on will make survivors who go up a tier of Madness have their auras revealed to the Doctor for 1 second. It will also give survivors in Madness's tiers 2 and 3 the Restraint Affliction, making the illusionary Doctor spawned last slightly longer in tier 2 and moderately longer in tier 3. This means that the fake Doctors will last 6 seconds longer in both tiers 2 and 3. It's actually hard-coded to be the same amount in both tiers, so I have no idea why the add-on just straight up lies and says that they're different numbers, because they're not. Next up is Order Class 2. This add-on will moderately increase the madness inflicted by your static blast. This means an increase to the amount of madness inflicted by static blast of 15%, bringing it up to 57.5 madness total. It will also give survivors in Madness tiers 2 and 3 the Order Affliction, making them see the illusionary pallets until they touch them. These pallets will be spawned within a range of 64 meters from the Doctor at broken pallet spots, and will happen every 20 seconds. The Doctor will be able to see these auras. Following that, we have a Discipline Class 2. This add-on will slightly increase the madness inflicted by your shock therapy. This means an increase to the madness inflicted by shock therapy of 15%, bringing it up to 34.5 madness per shock. It will also give survivors in Madness tiers 2 and 3 the Discipline Affliction, making it so that when a chase begins, they will perceive the red stain and terror radius as if the Doctor was right behind them for 6 seconds in tier 2 and 12 seconds in tier 3. And the final uncommon add-on for the Doc is Calm Class 2. This add-on will moderately increase your terror radius while Static Blast is off cooldown, and moderately decrease your terror radius while Static Blast is on cooldown. This means an increase or decrease to your terror radius by 15%, bringing it up to 36.8 meters or down to 27.2 meters, without any other terror radius modifiers. It will also give survivors in Madness tiers 2 and 3 a tremendous chance to have the terror radius play as if they were on the edge of your terror radius for 20 seconds. This will happen with a frequency of between every 20 and 40 seconds. Moving on to the Doctor's rare add-ons, we start off with Interview Tape that has been bumped up in rarity. Interview Tape will do what it used to do, and turn your shock therapy from a quote-unquote cone attack into a beam 20 meters long and 2 meters wide. Keep in mind that since the electrodes no longer increase width, it will always only be 2 meters wide, making it a little bit harder to land. After that, we have High Stimulus Electrode. High Stimulus Electrode will considerably increase the range and charge time of your shock therapy attacks. This means an increase to the range by 30%, bringing it up to 14.4 meters, and an increase to the charge time by 15%, bringing it up to 1.15 seconds. Following up on that, we have Restraint Class 3. This add-on will make it so that survivors who go up a tier of Madness will have their auras revealed to the Doctor for 2 seconds. It will also give survivors in Madness's tiers 2 and 3 the Restraint Affliction, making the illusionary Doctors they spawn last slightly longer in tier 2 and moderately longer in tier 3. This means that your illusionary Doctors will last 8 seconds in both tiers. Once again, yes, these add-ons lie. Next up is a downshifted add-on in rarity, formerly a very rare, but now just a plain rare, Obedience Carter's Notes. I haven't seen this many rarity shifts since I last played Magic the Gathering seriously. Obedience Carter's Notes will make Snap Out of It take 2 seconds longer to complete. and it will also give survivors in Madness Tiers 2 and 3 the Obedience Affliction, making them have a considerable chance to have their skill checks turn counterclockwise. I believe this is tied to the insane skill check mechanic for survivors, so a 66% chance in Tier 2 and a 100% chance in Tier 3. And the final uncommon add-on for the Doctor is Discipline Class 3. This add-on will moderately increase the madness inflicted by your shock therapy. This means an increase to the madness inflicted by shock therapy by 20%, bringing it up to 36 madness per shock. It will also give survivors in Madness Tiers 2 and 3 the Discipline Affliction, making it so that when a chase begins, they will perceive the red stain and terror radius as if you are right behind them for 8 seconds in Tier 2 and 16 seconds in Tier 3. Moving on to the Doctor's very rare add-ons, we start off with Restraint Liar's Notes. This add-on will make it so that anytime survivors go up a tier of madness, they will have their aura revealed to the Doctor for 3 seconds, and it will give them that Restraint Affliction, which is a lie, making the illusionary doctors last considerably longer in Tier 2 and tremendously longer in Tier 3. This just means that they'll last for 16 seconds longer in both tiers. Next up we have Order Carter's Notes. This add-on will considerably increase the madness inflicted by your Static Blast ability. This means an increase to the amount of madness inflicted by 25%, bringing it up to 62.5 madness per Static Blast. It will also give survivors in Madness Tiers 2 and 3 the Order Affliction, making it so that they will be able to see those illusionary pallets until touched. These pallets will be spawned every 20 seconds anywhere on the map, and the Doctor will be shown the auras for the fake pallets as well. Following that, we have Discipline Carter's Notes. This add-on will considerably increase the madness inflicted by your shock therapy. This means an increase of 25%, bringing it up to 37.5 madness per shock. It will also give survivors in Madness Tiers 2 and 3 the Discipline Affliction, which will make it so that when a chase begins, they will perceive the red stain and terror radius as if the Doctor is right behind them for 10 seconds in Tier 2, and this effect will be permanent in Tier 3. And the final very rare add-on is Calm Carter's Notes. This add-on will considerably increase your terror radius while Static Blast is ready, and considerably decrease your terror radius while it's on cooldown. This means an increase or decrease to your terror radius by 25%, bringing it up to or down to 40 or 24 meters, without any other modifiers. It will also give survivors in Madness Tiers 2 and 3 the Calm Affliction, which will give them a tremendous chance to have the heartbeat play as if they were on the edge of your terror radius for 20 seconds. This tremendous chance once again means that this will happen with a frequency of between 20 and 40 seconds. And while in Madness Tier 3, it will be constantly happening. So let's now talk about the Doctor's ultra rare add-ons, and we'll start with his newest one, Iridescent Queen. Iridescent Queen will make it so that anytime you hit a survivor with a shock therapy or static blast, they will gain a static charge. Anytime they come within 4 meters of another survivor, the static charge will jump to that survivor and give them the same effect of a shock therapy or static blast. Survivors within 4 meters of each other while hit by a shock therapy or static blast will not gain static charges, because that might be a little too strong. It actually has a bit of a hidden passive that is not described in the add-on, where it makes survivors have a little patch of electricity that trails on the ground behind them while they have the static charge, making it that slight bit easier to track them, especially on indoor maps or maps that don't have a lot of tall grass or bamboo. The static charge will work if a survivor tries to go and unhook a survivor that has a static charge, although you can't really do much with that information since you'll get the normal loud noise notification a second later anyways. This add-on is pretty good at making survivors just kind of go insane if they try and work with each other, so it's pretty good at pressuring survivors and putting them into Tier 3 a lot. And the Doctor's other ultra rare and the not new one is Iridescent King. Iridescent King is pretty much the same as it used to be, although some of the afflictions have changed a bit. Iridescent King will make it so that anytime a survivor is hit by a shock therapy or static blast, they will gain a random madness affliction from this list that we'll talk about really quickly. Iridescent Order will cause broken pallets to be replaced by illusionary pallets within 32 meters of the Doctor. Iridescent Restraint will tremendously increase the duration of the illusionary doctors. This once again means 16 seconds of increased duration. Iridescent Calm will give survivors the constant distant heartbeat as if they were at the edge of your terror radius. Iridescent Discipline will make it so that when a chase begins with a survivor, they will perceive the red stain and terror radius as if you're right behind them, about to give them a big old smack with your stick. This effect will be permanent for as long as they're in Tier 3. And the final affliction is Iridescent Obedience, which will make their skill checks turn counterclockwise. So let's briefly cover the Doctor's Teachable perks, since it's been quite a while since I covered his Teachable perks in a video. I'll just briefly cover them and what they do, and not to talk too much about their usefulness, or lack thereof. At level 30, you'll unlock the Teachable for the perk Overwhelming Presence. Overwhelming Presence will make any survivor within your terror radius have their item consumption increased by 80/90/100%. At level 35, you'll unlock the Teachable for the perk Monitor and Abuse. Monitor and Abuse will make it so that while you are in a chase, your terror radius will be increased by 8 meters. While you are not in a chase, your terror radius will instead be decreased by 8 meters, and your field of view will be increased by 3/5/10 degrees. And finally, at level 40, you'll unlock the Teachable for the perk Overcharge. Overcharge will make it so that anytime you kick, or as they call it, break, a generator, the next time a survivor begins work on that generator, they'll be faced with a tremendously difficult skill check. If they fail the skill check, the generator will explode and regress an additional 3/4/5%. Keep in mind that Overcharge, even though it's worded the same as Surge, does actually count as a failed skill check if missed, so it will be a total regression of 15% at rank 3, because reasons. So let's talk about how to play the Doctor now. The Doctor is a pretty straightforward killer, if we're being honest. The changes to him made him just more streamlined and easier to play, and less finicky. Now that there isn't any stance dancing, since we're not playing vanilla WoW, you've really only got 2 buttons outside of your normal hit people with big weapon button. So let me talk about one of the biggest gripes I have with the Doctor, and everyone who left comments on my previous video that I made forever ago about the Doctor. In that video, I said that shock therapy is not really worth using to prevent loops, because of how finicky it is, and how it sometimes just doesn't actually stop them from dropping pallets or vaulting windows. Some people left comments telling me that I was absolutely wrong, and I was playing Doctor wrong, and they always use their shock therapies perfectly to stop loops, and it never fails, even on dedicated servers, although those didn't exist back then. Whatever. I still believe those commenters are pretty much bullshitting me. If you watched my stream at all the week after the Doctor Rework came out, when I was basically just mainlining him to try and write the script, you'll see that I tried my hardest to make it work at loops to prevent pallets and windows from being used, and it worked maybe like 10% of the time if I got lucky. However, all of this playing Doctor did lead me to discover something about shock therapy that I hadn't really considered before. Perhaps I was looking at the use case for shock therapy all wrong. Once I reconsidered my preconceived notions about shock therapy, I came to a bit of a revelation. I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't exactly right either. Now let me explain more in detail what conclusion I came to and what I discovered while smashing my head against a wall trying to make shock therapy work at loops. You shouldn't be using shock therapy to try and prevent pallet drops. Instead, you should be using shock therapy to guarantee pallet drops. Oh no, the new chase music for the Doctor's Driven Interact insane, I hear you say. Bear with me. If you shock a survivor who is about to get to a pallet, they will typically drop the pallet early. And if they don't, you can just hit them for free. If they do, you've got the pallet without them being able to run the loop at all, and you can move on to the next one. Another thing that I came to realize is that shock therapy is really good at punishing people who like to camp pallets. They sit there thinking they can get away with it, you shock, then they either drop the pallet and you get it for free, as I said, or you get a free hit. Either way, it's pretty much a win-win for you. One big thing to remember about shock therapy is that it does have that 1-second delay before it will actually hit the survivors. Because of this delay, you want to lead your target a little bit to make sure it lands, which means that you're going to need to know how survivors typically run loops, especially if you're trying to prevent window vaults. Now, back to normal talk and not Interact's crazy time. With the change to snap out of it taking survivors back down to tier 1, I don't think you should really be wasting your time using shock therapy out in the open just to try and tier up survivors. It really just isn't worth it in my opinion. You should really be using it more during loops, and using your static blast to be tearing them up. Keep in mind that even with the add-ons that increase the amount of madness inflicted by shock therapy or static blast, they don't change the math at all. It will always take 2 shock therapy attacks and 1 static blast to make survivors go up the next tier of madness, which means that those add-ons are pretty worthless. So let's actually talk about his second ability, Static Blast. Honestly, when I heard about it from the leaks and the dev stream, I was like, eh. But now that I've played him, I think it's like the best part of his kit. Obviously, it does have that lengthy cooldown that I talked about way back when they leaked it, but the pressure and tracking that it provides are actually just insane. I typically try and use it as much as I can, but obviously it isn't the best thing to be using during a chase since it slows you down to that obscenely long string of numbers that I talked about earlier and takes 2 seconds to go off. The best time I found to use it is when you're near a generator that you either know they're working on because you can hear it or you have some perks, or you think they're working on it. If you charge up and release your static blast, you'll not only interrupt them from working on the generator that little bit, but you'll also get screams to tell you how many survivors are in your tear radius and where they are, if they're on that gen or maybe they're moving towards that gen or away from that gen. If you combine this with a restraint add-on, the ones that give you auras whenever they go up a tier of madness and make your doctor illusions last longer, Static Blast can be stupidly good at locating survivors and pushing them off of generators. Even without add-ons, if they're in tier 2, this automatically pushes them up to tier 3, making them stop their work on a generator and forcing them to snap out of it for 12 seconds. Even if you only get them up to tier 2 without any add-ons, this will start them spawning illusionary doctors, which will give you updates on where they are all over the map, provided you pay close attention, because remember they do only last for 1 second by default. The restraint add-ons that I talked about earlier will make these more effective since they'll last longer, which is why I think his restraint line of add-ons are probably his best. I believe that using Static Blast for pressuring survivors at range off of generators is just the best way to use it, but in a pinch or really early on in the match, you can use it for tracking. If you do use it for tracking, just remember that this means that you won't have it for another 60 seconds, so you want to make 100% sure that you're landing it, because if you miss, you're not going to have it for 60 seconds to pressure people off of generators. It just won't be available. With all the screams that you get from Static Blast, the illusionary doctor auras you'll get from survivors in tiers 2 and 3, and the screams from survivors in tier 3 when they're either just running around in tier 3 or failing snap out of its skill checks, I think the doctor is basically the king of passive tracking built into his kit. So make sure you're using all of this information to the best of your ability to keep your map pressure high so you can win those games. So let's talk now about some perks to consider running on the new doctor. Since the rework is pretty fresh, I'm not going to give a full meta build. I'll instead just recommend some perks that I have found work really well with his new kit. I'll start off that saying, once again, a lot of his really good add-ons and even parts of his base kit are going to help you with tracking, so I view him kind of like how I view Legion. You don't really need to run tracking perks because it's baked into your kit, and if you do, I would suggest only running one of them at any given time to help you out, if you think you need it. I think you want to focus more on slowdown perks, utility perks, and perks that will help you get through loops faster. In that vein, the first perk I'm going to recommend is Pop Goes the Weasel. With the Ruin change, you could consider running Ruin, but I honestly don't feel like it's worth it since it's still a hex perk and its effect is not the greatest. Pop will let you control generator progress a lot better and in larger chunks, and let you decide which generators you want to defend. The second and third perk that I'm going to recommend go hand in hand with each other, Sloppy Butcher and Thanatophobia. You can run one or the other, but I feel like if you're only going to pick one of them, you probably want to go with Sloppy Butcher. Combined, they can slow the game down a decent amount, but only if you're getting lots of hits on survivors quickly, so you're going to want to spread your pressure and injure as many survivors as you can. And the final slowdown quote-unquote perk that I would say is pretty decent fit for the Doctor is Corrupt Intervention. While it doesn't technically slow the game down since it just blocks off 3 gens, it shrinks the map down at the beginning, so you can get off a big static blast that potentially hits all 4 survivors, helping you get those first few chases started off insanely quickly, giving you a ton of early pressure and getting you off on the right foot. Corrupt is fairly map and spawn dependent, so sometimes it just doesn't do anything, but I believe the Doctor can make a lot of good use out of the shrunk map in the beginning. So with slowdown perks out of the way, let's talk about some anti-loop, tracking, and utility perks that you may want to consider using. The first one that I found works really well if you're using shock therapy, like I talked about, to force out pallet drops early: Brutal Strength. In addition to letting you break those force dropped pallets faster, if you're running pop, it will make kicking gens faster as well, saving you a few precious seconds here and there. Honestly, if you've seen my videos, you know I normally recommend Enduring Spirit Fury on basically every killer, but I don't feel that you'll actually get much use out of it on Doctor if you're shocking survivors at loops to either cancel pallet drops or make them drop them early, since you won't be able to swing into them because you do have that short cooldown after shocking. Obviously this is just a playstyle call, but I personally don't think the Doctor needs Enduring or Spirit Fury. So let's instead move on to some tracking perks that I think are the best with Doc if you feel like you need them. As I said, you're going to only really want to run one at a time, and with certain setups of add-ons, certain perks work best. If you're running Calm add-ons, and you're in a chase with your Static Blast up and ready to go, you can get insane usage out of Infectious Fright, because your tear radius will be massive. Even without Calm add-ons, Infectious is still a pretty solid choice for snowballing, but the Calm add-ons just push it way over the top. If you aren't running Calm add-ons, but instead running some other generic add-ons, you may want to try running Whispers to make sure that your Static Blast is guaranteed to hit at least one survivor when you use it, since you really do want to be hitting at least one survivor with it due to the 60-second cooldown. Whispers is an all-around solid tracking perk, and probably the best one in the game in my opinion, so it'll fit right at home on any killer. Doctor's not an exception to this rule. If you find yourself running the perks Pop Goes the Weasel and Brutal Strength, you may want to consider running Surveillance as well to help round the build out a little bit and figure out when people are trying to stop your aggressing generators. While it isn't perfect information, it does make kicking generators more useful in the long run, so if you find yourself kicking a lot of generators with Doctor, Surveillance, not a bad option. With the Doctor's amazing built-in tracking, you may want to consider running Hex Haunted Grounds. Once the totem gets cleansed, if you have Static Blast up, say it's the beginning of the match, you can do insane amounts of work and insane amounts of damage to a survivor team early on, and get that pressure just up and hitting the ground running. I feel like Haunted Grounds is pretty much a no-brainer for Doc if you want to give it a shot. And the final perk that I'm going to recommend will make AUTs like this video: Save the Best for Last. Since Doctor does have to just rely on his basic attacks to down survivors at any given time, Save the Best for Last is a fantastic option, and you can kind of just slot it in without any consideration to what other perks or add-ons you're using. So now, I'm a little hesitant to talk about this, but longtime viewers of this channel will know that in my older videos, I had a segment where I would discuss that build, meaning a build that's extremely boring and unfun to play against, for the survivors typically, or for the killer. There haven't been that many recently. Behavior's been pretty good about not screwing up, so that segment has been somewhat phased out, but boy oh boy, did Behavior ever buff the living hell out of the old Doctor of that build that I covered in my older video. I'm talking of course about 3-gen or Hostage Doc, but I don't really know if it's a that build anymore in the traditional sense, so I'll classify it as just a very mean meme build for now. Because you actually can hit survivors, and you're not just shocking them off of generators and making the game last in like 2 hours without ever killing anybody. You can actually kill people with Hostage Doc now. Neat. With the way that the new Calm add-ons work, you can just passively have a massive terror radius without having to worry about swapping stances, losing your map pressure because you have to hit somebody, or you have to shock them instead of hitting them to get them off the generator. That's all out the window now. Now you basically just don't ever hit left control the Static Blast, and your terror radius is bananas large. The basic build is just both Calm add-ons, obviously, and then terror radius perks, but it's typically built mainly around the interaction between Overcharge and Unnerving Presence. Combining these two perks and kicking generators almost guarantees that survivors are going to miss the skill check and regress the generator by 15% every time you kick one, making it a mini Pop Goes the Weasel. I was messing around with this build on PTB and live servers, and this is the perk setup that I found works best. Distressing for an even larger terror radius, because why not? Unnerving Presence, Overcharge, and oddly enough, a perk that I talk very poorly of all the time, chlorophobia. Slap on an offering to go to the game, and survivors will not have a good time. Since you can actually hit survivors, and this build no longer relies on just shocking them off of generators and stalling the game out for eternity, the game will actually eventually end, but it will be very slow and very painful for survivors. You can run this build on just about any map by running a 3-gen strat, but on the game in particular, with the setup of double calm and distressing, your tear radius, I did the math, covers about 5/7 of the map at any given time. So you can just play like a normal killer, albeit without your static blast. Moving on to a more fun meme build for survivors, let's talk about the one that I call Insanity with Friends, or Checkmate if you'd prefer a more clever name for it. For this build, run whatever perks you enjoy, and then both ultra-rare add-ons, Iridescent King and Iridescent Queen. This will make it so that every time you shock therapy or static blast somebody, they'll gain that static charge from Iridescent Queen, and Iridescent King will keep inflicting them with more and more afflictions as they try and team up to work on generators, or rescue each other, or heal each other, or whatever. Given the amount of screaming that will happen when you run these together, this is probably the most pure build for the Doctor in terms of lore. Enjoy the sweet sounds of survivor screams as you play with this build. And that's it for this episode of Entity Education Extra Credit, covering the new Doctor rework for Herman Carter, probably better known as the Doctor. As always, thank you very much for watching. Thank you to everyone who subscribes to this channel, likes these videos, leaves nice comments, or even mean comments telling me that I suck at Doctor and I don't know what I'm doing. Thank you to everyone who stops by my Twitch stream. Yes, I do stream on Twitch 4 days a week for about 5 hours a day, so come check that out in the description. If you want the spreadsheet that I made with all of the add-on numbers for everything, that's in the description as well. There is an Entity Education Discord if you want to join. Link in the description where everything else is, shockingly enough. I made a terrible pun and I'm going to end the episode now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.